Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Tally. This is episode 17, and I'm your host, Brian Tally. The mission and the goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of some of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and on Spotify. The online information and handles are all located on the scrolling ticker at the bottom portion of your screen. Be sure to like and share the program as well. You can also support the program by going to Anchor FM or Spotify and clicking the support button. Also, become a program sponsor today. Get your gear, products, merchandise, or services out to the general public. Program sponsorships include a custom written script to advertise your business to its fullest potential to get the results you're looking for. To learn more, email me today at thetallybill@gmail.com. That's thetallybill@gmail.com. Folks, we have a very special guest joining us on today's program. It's not every day you have the opportunity to sit down with a man such as our next guest. Today we welcome Chris Denton. Chris served 6 years in the Army as a 19 Delta scout and deployed to Iraq in 2003 and 2004. Soon after, Chris became addicted to prescription pain meds that turned into alcoholism, which led him down the path of a hefty cocaine addiction. After falling into a life of addiction, Chris's life spiraled out of control and he nearly lost it all. After 18 years of this destructive behavior, Chris had a massive overdose that landed him in the VA hospital for 3 days. The odds were completely stacked against Chris, but through hope and strength, he got himself clean. Today, he celebrates 487 days clean and sober, and he hasn't looked back. Today, Chris now races dirt bikes for what he refers to as throttle therapy, as well as volunteers at Fort Carson's ASAP program, talking to soldiers about substance abuse and addiction. With that, we are honored to be joined by Chris Denton. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm great. First of all, thank you for having me today. It's just an honor to sit down with you and to be able to have this conversation.
We are honored to be here with you. I know you have an extremely important story that needs to get out there to the general public because what you do every day is your mission is to save lives and to ultimately give hope to the people that need it most. And
Right.
ultimately, the only way that you can reach some people is to say, I've been there and I've been in your shoes. Because a lot of counselors out there have never done drugs. They've just went to school to learn about how to treat it. But what better of a man and a leader that can actually enter the trenches with these addicted people that can hear life value and real lessons and real encouragement and real advice from a man that has been in those same muddy waters and those same trenches. So for everything you are doing, it is truly admirable. And I'm very proud of you as you celebrate today, 487 days clean and sober. That is remarkable. Let's get started. We have a lot to talk about here. And again, the mission of this program is to add life value, to add value to the lives of everyday people. And folks, if you listen close enough to every single program, I don't care who you are, you can find something in these episodes that can help you, a colleague, a neighbor, perhaps even family members. So with that, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Southwest Tennessee, a little town that if you blinked, you'd drive right through it. So realistically, small town, USA. I can't remember what our graduating class was. I think it was like 100, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what mine was too in Woodland Park. I graduated from Woodland Park High School, just right up the pass from you.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so Tennessee, beautiful country out there. I've driven through it several times. I remember coming home from Camp Lejeune, seeing those green rolling hills and the barns and the pastures. It's very beautiful. It's a great sight to see.
It's a gorgeous place, and that's, we'll get into it later, but that's where the riding and racing started.
Outstanding.
Gorgeous part of the world, and I miss it every day, but, I love my Colorado home as well.
Right. Hey, you can always visit and, always do both.
Absolutely.
Now, you spent some time in the Army. What was it like serving our country?
Well, the first 2 years of it, I was in the Mississippi National Guard. And people always ask me, hey, aren't you from Tennessee? How'd you wind up in the Mississippi National Guard? And the Mississippi National Guard was the closest unit to my home that I could be a scout in. So being a scout was a lifelong dream for me. And so wherever I had to go, I think back then you could drive 128 miles one way to a guard unit, and that's all that they would allow. If it was 129 miles, you weren't allowed to be there. So I just, I fell in love with my job. Mm-hmm. And went through Fort Knox, basic training at Fort Knox in 1998. And just, I couldn't get enough of it. Like, mm-hmm. This is what I was born to do. Mm-hmm. And fast forward a few years, I landed here at Fort Carson in 2001. Mm-hmm. And went through a little bit of a little thing, nasty little divorce for the first time there. And that's when I started noticing that my intake of alcohol was probably a little higher than it should have been. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, I met my son's mother not long after that, just before our deployment. And then we kicked out of here in 2003. So it was right at the end of my contract. As a matter of fact, when we landed in 2004 is when I got out.
Mm-hmm. And that was after serving a combat tour overseas.
Right.
Now, can you explain to our civilian listeners what a scout is?
So basically the eyes and ears of the battalion commander. Our job is to, back then, our job was to go out in front behind enemy lines or out in front of the main battle element. So if you're running a tank battle or, or whatever the case may be, we go out in advance of everyone else. And our job is to find the enemy without making contact. So realistically, your best weapon system is your radio, because you're calling back and forth, you're calling in enemy locations so that they can use a barrage of tactics from our, field artillery to the infantry, everything in between. So that was kind of the primary function. Now, what that transitioned into was more along the lines of an infantry type person. Mm-hmm. It transitioned into in combat in Iraq. We didn't do a whole lot of scouting. We did more door kicking and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So clearing buildings, setting up observation posts where we would overwatch different avenues of approach to make sure people weren't putting in IEDs and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any special memories from the time that you served in the U.S. Army?
I do, as a matter of, I have several fond memories. Some of my memories are the stuff nightmares are made of. But the good ones, absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to, like, everything. As soon as you asked me that question, everything just kind of blanked in my mind.
That's all right. We can always, go back to that. I know I get pretty bad brain fog too, and sometimes my mind's racing, and I know what to say. The words won't come out right, and I always got to go back to it. And you're like, man, what was that special memory again? Oh yeah, I remember.
Well,
So
I mean, one thing that stands out in particular, I don't think a lot of people fully understand the way of living over there in Iraq or Afghanistan, in these countries that we've been deployed to. But one thing that I will never forget is the smell of the open sewers that ran rampant through the streets. Here in the United States and several other places, we have a closed sewer system, so you don't see it, you don't think about it. Hell, you drive over it all the time. There, they don't have toilet fixtures in some of these things. It's just a hole in the floor. And that runs out into a concrete ditch that runs down the street into a river or whatever the case may be. And one night we were on patrol, and I stepped in one of these open sewers, and I had to get rid of the boots because it was just the most awful thing that you could ever imagine. But yeah, I don't know if I'm fond of that memory, but I do have that memory,
Well, hey, man, we all step in shit in our lives, and it's what you do afterwards that will ultimately define us. And
that's the absolute truth.
And I think that's a good way. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, Chris. Now, a lot of times when folks are on active duty, they have a hard time transitioning back to civilian life. Do you have any experiences that you would like to share about how that transition was, and how was life like after the Army?
Honestly, the transition went pretty well. At first, I'd say the first 30 days, I was newly married. We weren't expecting at that point, but I was newly married. And to be honest with you, Brian, I had no discernible job skills that transfer into the open market. And so being a scout, my only job is to figure out how to destroy the enemy in any way that I can. Well, the mafia is not hiring when I get out, right? So I'm left with no skills whatsoever. The only other thing that I can do is go to work in a law enforcement agency, and my temperament will not permit that. So, at that point, that was out the door. Matter of fact, I went all the way through the selection process at the Colorado Highway Patrol. And they asked me a question in an interview that I answered, and they didn't like the answer. So that ended my law enforcement career before it ever even got started. So I found myself working at an armored car company, out of the frying pan into the fire kind of a thing. And that turned into a dead end job. The drinking got heavier and heavier. And so I never had any problems. I never had, currently now I've in the last, in 2008, I was diagnosed with PTSD and severe anxiety. But I never acknowledged any of those issues when I got out of the military in 2004. And so now you can imagine that that's fueling this fire, right? And it all came to a head in January of 2008. I was tired of the dead end job. I had a 2-year-old at home. My ex-wife was there, and I got to tell you, I'm probably one of the few that are going to say this, but my ex-wife is one of the most amazing people that I've ever known. And I have so much respect for her that it's not even funny. But anyhow, I was fed up with the world, fed up with everything in general. And so I drove my Jeep up into the mountains with a bottle of Jack Daniels, a full bottle of Jack Daniels, and a Glock 9mm pistol. And after I drank the whole bottle, I put that loaded gun to my head, Brian, and I pulled the trigger. And obviously it failed. The firing pin hit the primer, but the primer didn't discharge. And
take your time.
I can tell you this. Most of us in our lifetime will never see God face to face. I did.
What was that experience like when you were going through all that during that time? Is there any euphoric type moments like you were going through this incredibly dark time and you drove up there to ultimately end it all?
Yep.
And God had other plans for you.
Absolutely.
And when you saw God, what was that like?
That was the most instant sobriety right there. I was after I drank that whole bottle, I was instantly sober for that split minute, 2 minutes, whatever it was. And I sat there, I ejected that round like a good scout would, cleared the jam, stuck the gun out the window, and I fired the next 6 rounds into the dirt. Now, if that's not a higher power speaking to you, telling you that you're not done, you need to stay in this fight, even though you don't know what it's about yet. I don't know what is. And I thought, okay, that was the breaking point. That was when I went and got enrolled into VA, started, attempting to get help, to get better, because, even then I didn't want to die. I just didn't think I had any other choices. I thought that was the end of the road for me.
Right. You felt like you had nothing left to give.
Right. I felt like I'd done everything I could do in this life. Right.
And what I've learned through my own battles with severe anxiety, and depression and living with physical pain, and, is that, God puts obstacles, in our life. And these are tests, that we ultimately go through, in these trials and in these tribulations. And like I was saying earlier, we all fall down, but it's how you get up that will ultimately define you.
Absolutely.
And will ultimately leave a legacy behind for others to look to, and for advice or encouragement, whatever it may be. Now, I sincerely appreciate you making yourself vulnerable, because I do believe that tonight you will save a life. Or when anybody listens to this, you will save a life, because people need to hear this. Real life people giving real life value and sharing stories that matter, because your story matters. Now, I want to dig a little bit into how this addiction all started, because ultimately you started with alcohol,
Right.
but then it ended all the way up into you being addicted to cocaine.
Right.
So can you explain that timeline?
So I'd always been one to have a couple of beers. Back when in active duty, our, I guess you'd say bosses, right? The people that were above us, our first line supervisors, when we would leave work, they would always tell us, go home and drink one beer. And when you ask them why, it's because you cannot be recalled to duty that day. Once you've already had an alcoholic beverage, there is no more duty for you that day. So in essence, I mean, you can't call it promoting alcoholism by any means, but that's essentially what was going on. Hell, we would have what they called Tiger Day in the 3rd ACR. It was a battalion level deal in the motor pool. It was a cookout, barbecue, and have a couple of drinks, supported by the CO. So at the end of the day, it was everywhere. And again, being a grown man, I'm going to have a couple beers. It's no big deal. Well, that transitioned into the deployment. I got hurt, was able to finish out my deployment, and then never had the surgeries done that I needed. And so the Percocet habit started because the government will hand out pill after pill after pill after pill. And you know this as good as I do. You've lived it as well.
Are you talking about the VA here, Chris, that was giving you all these pills?
Active duty.
Oh, on active duty. Okay.
Yeah. And then they were giving me pills for side effects from the pills. It was unbelievable. And so it's not hard to form an addiction when you're just being fed this shit all the time.
Yeah.
Well, then the transition out of the military came, and I'm hooked on Percocets. At that point, I'm already an alcoholic. There's no hiding it. So when I get out, I spent 4 years self-medicating with cocaine because I could no longer get the prescription painkillers. Right? I wasn't enrolled in the VA. Somebody introduced me to it, and it helped. And I thought, okay, this is cool. So
how did this transpire? Like, getting out of the military, they've been feeding you pain pills. You're mixing pain pills with alcohol, and it's not really putting you in the right frame of mind.
By no means.
What happened to Chris to say, I want to try cocaine?
I couldn't get the pills anymore.
How did you get the cocaine? Is it that easy to get on our streets? You just meet somebody and they're like, hey, try this? Or did you ultimately say, hey, I got to find this drug and I want to try it to see if it's going to help me?
I'm going to sell out pretty much every drug dealer that I've ever known with this one statement right here. You can walk into a bar, any bar in the continental United States, in any state, any town, and you can find cocaine. And the way you can find it is you watch people. If there's one person in the room that everybody keeps coming up to and shaking hands with, that's a drug deal happening right there. There's your dealer right there. If it gets up and goes to the bathroom multiple times in an hour, that's your drug dealer right there. If he seems to know everybody in the bar, it's two things. He's either an alcoholic and he's there all the time, or he's your dealer.
Incredible. So most folks like yourself, when you needed that fix, you would find yourself in a bar and you would ultimately find that dealer, make your deal, and then snort the cocaine.
Absolutely.
How long How many years did you live a life of heavy addiction with cocaine?
18 years.
Now, were you able to work while all this was going on?
Oh, absolutely.
So, how did you hold down your career, um, having an addiction to cocaine, and you were still drinking at the time as well, right?
Absolutely.
So,
So
so would you agree that you were a functional addict?
I am very, very highly functional.
Hmm.
Um, Job wise, I would stay in a place about 5 years before anybody would start to sniff around and try to figure out what was going on with me. The
Hmm.
mood swings, the mood swings were out of the control.
Hmm.
It even caused, the addictions, the alcoholism, the drug abuse. You're not in your right mind. So I wasn't making decisions based on what my wife and I wanted, what was best for my family. I was making decisions based on how can I feed this addiction and keep this monster fed,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so it led me to infidelity. My ex-wife caught me, and she divorced me. However, I thank God she did, because she had no idea about the cocaine. She knew I was a drunk, but she had no idea about the prescription pills. She had no idea about the alcohol, the cocaine, none of it. So when all of that came to a head, she did what she should have done. She made the right choice and divorced me. Um, knowing knowing that I would always bounce back, knowing that I always had something, to fall back on, which was selling drugs, right? My cocaine habit at the end was about $2,000 a month. That's more than an E4. An E4 in active duty right now makes about $1,000 a month.
Okay, so let's stop right there. How, how can somebody afford $2,000 a month to just snort up their nose? I mean, you must have had a very high paying job to be able to afford this addiction for so long.
I really didn't. Um, at one point, I worked at a Schriever Air Force Base. So I
Hmm.
was a government contractor for a little while, and I was only pulling in about 48,000 a year. Mortgage, child support payment, the whole 9 yards, trying to feed this cocaine demon. So I started dealing drugs, and that was the only way I could afford to do it.
So here we are. We started really small, from the alcohol, the pills, to doing the drugs, now to selling the drugs, to ultimately um, be able to afford the same fix that you were selling to others to get their fix. So um, you know that right there, just is proof that these folks that are addicts will literally do anything
Right.
uh, to get that fix. What is that feeling like when you do the cocaine? Like it, what type of experiences?
Well, to be honest with you, if it's decent, it 60% of your taste buds start in your not nasal cavity,
Hmm.
right? And so when you do it, it almost tastes like diesel fuel smells, if you can kind of put that together.
Mm.
It's not, there's nothing enjoyable about the process of snorting cocaine. The end result is that it accelerates your heart rate, if you've been drinking quite a bit, it can sharpen up your senses because you're at a heightened sense of awareness. That's what I used it for quite a bit, was to wake up. You know, it won't sober you up. But the majority of it for me was to be able to keep going.
Are there a lot of Americans that do cocaine that we may not even know about?
More than you would like to imagine, and more than you can wrap your head around.
Incredible. It just, you know, like the people I know, you know, and hang around, I've always put myself around like-minded people, and, you know, and I don't do drugs. You know, the only drugs I take are the medications that are prescribed to me by the VA.
Right.
You know, so I guess I'm, you know, naive to the fact that there are so many people out there that do this and perhaps struggle from it. And the addiction is so heavy that they can't stop. And it leads to their lives literally unraveling into a downward spiral, if you will, you know, if you will, you know, that leads to this nightmare. Now, when you were doing this, did it help at all with any of your anxiety and depression, or was this something that just compounded like interest, and every month, every year, it would just get worse and worse and worse?
You know, the cycle, I'll tell you about the cycle there towards the end before I hit the hospital. I would drink myself to sleep every night because it was a depressant. It was slowing my body down to where I could actually sleep. And then I'd be so drunk the next morning, I'd have to get up and go to work, that I would lay out a line of Coke and do that just to wake up. And so I would drink myself to sleep, wake up, do the cocaine, drink myself to sleep, wake up, do the cocaine. And I would do it throughout the day.
And this was an 18-year cycle?
Yes, sir.
Incredible. That right there is, I really don't have the words for it, because, you know, that right there is something that, you know, I've never really known anybody that has done that, and, you know, had you know, and has lived that life. But maybe I do, and a lot of these people just hide it. Do folks that typically experiment with these hardcore drugs, is it easy to pick them out? Like, if it's family, or if there's a parent listening right now that may be concerned about a child of theirs that may be experimenting with drugs, is it easy to really expose them, or is the behavior sometimes normal and you wouldn't really know unless you were going through their drawers, or you find it in their clothes, or whatever it may be?
Now, I can tell you, excuse me, I can tell you this, there are several symptoms. If you see somebody, and this is not everybody is built a little bit differently, but if you see somebody doing Coke especially, they're going to do a lot of this. They're going to play with their nose to make sure they don't have any residue around the edges of their nose. So if you see them doing this and they don't have a runny nose, chances are that's a Coke addict. A lot of times they won't be able to make eye contact. They won't be able to sit still because they're fidgeting constantly. The pupils in their eyes will dilate when you do it. Obviously, it's like hitting nitrous in your car, right? So the pupil in your eye will actually open up quite a bit. So if you see somebody with, you know, severely dilated eyes, that's a good, you know, indicator they're on something, not necessarily just cocaine, but something. And the biggest one for any addiction whatsoever is they will absolutely lie to you about it. could be your best friend of 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
If they're embarrassed about it and don't want you to know, they will lie straight to your face. They will make excuses of why they can't show up to events that you invite them to. And it's some of the dumbest, like I've used some of the dumbest excuses in the world. Like, oh, my dryer's out, so I got to fix my dryer. That's why I can't come to your party. You know, stuff like that.
So you would say that it's very secretive.
Absolutely.
And would you would you do this with other people that you knew that were doing the same thing in the crowd that you were running with? Or is this something that you would take and you would go personally off somewhere by yourself and do this to experience the effect that it was giving you?
So I ran with a very popular group here based out of Colorado Springs,
Mm-hmm.
a name that I won't put out there, but it's a veteran organization.
Mm-hmm.
And was really had a lot of friends in this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Hung out with them all the time, went to all the functions with them, and none of them, not one of them, knew what was going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I can walk into a bathroom with my drugs prepped. I would prep them before I would leave the house. I can walk into a bathroom, and in the time it takes a man to use the bathroom, I can snort a line, put everything away, and be out the door. Nobody would ever know.
Incredible. And these are going on in bathrooms all across our country.
Everywhere. Truck stops, restaurants, bars, diners, your friend's house. You never know. You will never know.
We are going through a horrifying time in America right now with fentanyl being the number one killer now for folks between the ages of 18 and 35. The fentanyl that's coming in from China and ultimately through the southern border is hitting the streets of America at an alarming rate, and it's entering our high schools.
Yep.
Unfortunately, and very sadly, it doesn't take but a little grain of this to literally kill the person that is experimenting with this. What is the difference between the cocaine that you were doing and what's out there now with this dangerous fentanyl that's coming in from overseas?
Well, I can tell you the cocaine that I was doing 18 years ago was a lot more pure. Okay, so it's not been cut. And what I mean by cut is if you take a package, right? Let's just say you have an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You take an ounce and they'll cut it with several different things. Simulac, the powdered Simulac they'll use. And they're trying to make that ounce into an ounce and a quarter or an ounce and a half. So you're mixing all this stuff up, right? Well, fentanyl got introduced in the last, 3-4 years. It's been around before it got popular. And so what they'll do is they'll cut this stuff up and mix it into your cocaine. So now you have no clue the shit you're snorting. You don't know if it's laced. Chances are you don't know the person that did the cutting. So you have no idea. There's no measurements. There's no regulation. There's none of that. You just get what you get and hope it doesn't kill you.
And people are so addicted that they're willing to put something in their body that they know could potentially kill them right then and right now. And that right there in its own right is frightening.
It's insanity, Brian's what it is. I had 3 overdoses that I wound up in the hospital 3 times over 4 months because of that fentanyl bullshit.
Chris, take me to your overdose that landed you in a VA hospital that would ultimately begin to wake you up and ultimately save your life and put you on a path of becoming clean and sober and living a life of gratitude?
Wow, you're talking about my alive day. That's what I call it, my alive day. Tuesday morning, routine. I'd been drinking the night before and had to get up and be functional. I texted my employer. Had to be at work at 9 o'clock, and I texted him. I said, "Bro, I can't pull this off. I don't feel well." I gave him some random BS excuse. The truck was broken. He goes, "I'll send one of the guys to pick you up." And I'm like, "Oh crap." So I go to my laptop, lay it out, put a big line of cocaine on there, do the line, go take a shower, and the guy picks me up. I've got so much of this shit going through my system, I can't keep my hands still. My hands are doing this. About like that. We get to work about 9:30, 9:40 in the morning. My hands went from doing this to doing this. Like both of them. I couldn't stop them. Like I could not grab my arm and stop it from flopping around. And I knew, because I'd been down this road, I'm like, this is an overdose. I need air. I got to get out of here. So I started walking. Didn't tell the boss, didn't tell anybody. I just started walking. And I thought, okay, there's a little ballpark down here. I'll just sit on the curb, get my shit together, then I'll go back to work. Well, I sent a message to a Facebook group that was all veterans through Messenger. And I was like, somebody needs to get here. I am not well. And I happened to have the presence of mind to send my location. And at that point, I knew it in my heart, in my mind, in everything that I've ever believed in my life. This is where I'm going to die. This is the end. There is no more. And within what seemed to be hours, it was minutes, I had two of my friends pick me up. They got down there, got on the ground with me. One of them was on the phone with the VA trying to find an inpatient rehab in this country, which we have zero. I think there's one in South Dakota. It does me a lot of good. The other one was like, screw it, we're going to the hospital in Denver. So they get me in the car. I'm coming down a little bit. I'm calming down. My heart's racing. It feels like the left side of my body, my chest is swollen. It wasn't, but it felt that way. And so I had the presence of mind. I called my ex-wife and I said, I can't get our son, because I usually see him every Wednesday night. I said, I'm going to the hospital. She goes, why? And I said, I've had an overdose and I feel like I'm going to die. So at that moment, after all these years, she learned over the phone that I had more than an alcohol problem. And I got to tell you, Brian, I'm a big, strong, tough guy. But that broke me. To have to admit it just broke me to my core. At the end of it, it felt great to get it off my chest. And as you can see, it still upsets me.
Sure.
It felt great to finally tell her.
Right. To get that secret, that you had been holding on to for so long. And in the back of your mind, that you're not doing the right thing and you're keeping this secretive and you're living this kind of double life. Like, hey, I'm dad. And also I'm an addict over here that's, really struggling. And I can't tell anybody that. I can't show my weakness, because if I show and expose my weakness, especially as a veteran, that right there in its own right is a massive hit to our pride. And, and every man, out there knows what I understand about pride and being a contributor and just living that, that honorable life. But if you find yourself in this trap and everything is so secretive and everything is just piling up and piling up and piling up, ultimately you will have that explosion. You will have that brokenness. And unless you've ever been broken, people can't really understand what people go through when they are broken. And it's hard to admit that you're broken. I was broken. Broken due to other unforeseen circumstances. But being broken, we all have things in common. You don't need to have a cocaine problem, to be broken. You can have severe anxiety and be broken. You can be depressed and be broken and be absolutely destroyed by the punches that life throws us. But ultimately, we all know that we live in a society of forgiveness, and you can get better, and you can get up, fight back, and to begin to get 1% better every single day. Get 1% better today than what you were yesterday. I want to start talking about Chris Denton, the success story. I want to hear it from you. You are today 487 days clean and sober. And I can't even begin to have the words to congratulate you on how big of a life change this has become for you. 18 years as an addict, and that day in the VA hospital woke you up, and that's when you said enough is enough. I got to get my life back. This is not me. I need to wake up. And you did. 487 days into this, and it is miraculous. And a lot of folks out there that cannot say that they've done that. And there could be folks out there struggling right now. Folks, if you are, please get the help you need, because we can all get better. And it doesn't have to happen overnight. It could be baby steps, because if you start adding up all those little steps, you're going to find one giant leap. And that one giant leap will eventually get you across that finish line in living the life that you were intended to live. Now, because of you becoming clean and sober, you have found it in you to give back to
Absolutely.
people that are going through the same things that you went through. Can you explain to us what the ASAP program is?
It's actually the ADAPT, A-D-A-P-T program out of Fort Carson. So in my sober journey, I backed away from everybody. Mm-hmm. I did. And that wasn't meant to be punitive to my friends and family. I just needed that time to put my own head on right, to start seeing things with clean, a clear vision. And so I was approached by just this wonderful friend of mine, Joe. Her and her husband, Danny, are just amazing people. I think I actually met them. And she knew the guy over at the ADAP program. She goes, Chris, you got to talk to this guy. You got to share your story. The way you do it, they will understand it, versus coming from a counselor that's never been down that road. And I said, you know what? Let's do it. I'm in. God spared me. He saw fit. He knows better than I do. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I'm nervous about it. Nobody likes to admit their faults. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what? If this is the direction, let's go. Mm-hmm. Let's just do the damn thing. So I go for 30 to 40 minutes. have a conversation with soldiers that are active duty. They have either gotten, for some strange reason, they're in this program, whether it's a DUI, whether it's an offense with alcohol or drugs. I don't know any of that information, but that's how you end up in that program. So speaking with them, I go in and I tell my story. I tell them, you know, it took me almost killing myself to see the light and go, you know what? I'm done. There's more out there for me. Brian, I had to look at my 14-year-old son for the first time and tell him when I picked him up that next Wednesday, hey, bud, do you know what today is? He's like, it's Wednesday, Dad. I'm like, no, this is the first time you've ever seen me sober in your entire life.
I bet that hits you.
If that don't hit you in the damn chest, you don't have a pulse.
Oh, yeah, I bet that was a very special moment for you.
I can't even tell you how much better my life is. The relationships with my friends, the relationships with my son, the relationships with my family, the relationships at work have all grown exponentially. My motivation.
And I'm sure you lost a lot of friends too, you know, when you're making this transition from, you know, from being an addict to cleaning yourself up, you know, because you were hanging out with, you know, other guys that, you know, that were, you know, doing the drugs and all the alcohol, and you know, and you can't live on both sides of that fence. Because
I can tell you this. One of the things that hurt me the most in the world was the fact that, remember I told you that veteran organization I used to hang out with? Not every. There's only, I can count on both hands how many of them still talk to me. They all walked away. You know who didn't walk away? My family. Well, first of all, God Almighty didn't walk away. My family and the people that I ride dirt bike with. My moto family stayed right in there with me. And I had, you know, several, I'd say maybe 8 or 10 of my veteran friends that were in there. But, you know, every time they wanted to go hang out and get around each other, or they wanted to, you know, do anything, it was at a distillery or a brewery. And I choose not to go in those places.
Sure.
It's not that I don't care. I just don't. Let me rephrase that. I have a very good friend that owns a brewery, and I wish this man all the happiness and success in the world. I just cannot be a part of it. And I think people misunderstood my lack of presence for me being angry. I wasn't angry or mad. I just had to get away from it.
Sure, it's the smells, it's the memories, and if you put yourself in that situation, right?
At 480 days in, can I go into a bar and throw darts like I used to really love doing? Absolutely. I can even have a non-alcoholic beer, and it just cements the fact that I don't miss it.
Yeah.
Every time I taste it, I'm like, you know what? You need to get that as far away from me as you can.
Right.
You know, this journey, and I tell you, this journey has been amazing. If you'd have asked me 487 days ago, Brian, Chris, will you ever quit drinking? Will you ever quit doing drugs? I'd have said, why? No intent, no desire. I'm perfectly okay. I'd found that middle ground to where the highs weren't as high, but the lows weren't as low. You see what I mean? I finally edged it out.
Even keel.
Right. And I was happy there. I was highly under the influence. And then all of a sudden, bam, this hits. Hell, when I showed up to the hospital, did you know that the VA would not admit me into the hospital unless they had The only way I could get admitted was I had to tell them I was contemplating suicide. A $3 billion hospital in Denver, Colorado that the VA runs does not have an inpatient substance abuse treatment program.
Yeah, and also they have a $300 billion annual budget. And that is unsatisfactory to our nation's veterans, especially our nation's veterans that are addicted to drugs and alcohol because of the wounds of war. Now, we only have a few minutes left here because this interview has gone so fast. And I sincerely appreciate everything that you have shared with our listeners. You are adding life value today. In the 4 minutes that we have left, can you please tell us a little bit about throttle therapy?
Okay. My favorite part. So I tell everybody everywhere I go that your addiction is a habit. If you think of it as a habit, right? Mm-hmm. You have to mentally change your habits. You've got to, it's behavior modification. What I chose to do, I have passion for riding, dirt bikes, four-wheelers, mountain bikes, just get me out in the great outdoors. Mm-hmm. Folks, I don't care if it's underwater basket weaving. If you dig it and it brings you joy, it brings you peace, then do it, right? So throttle therapy is my way of doing it. And every time I put a helmet on, whenever I go for a ride, I don't think about the grocery list or the bills or the any of that stuff. I'm in that moment, in that magical place that is the national forest in Colorado, enjoying life, just doing what I love doing. It's better for me to I find more peace and more therapeutic value in doing that than I do in anything else. And a big part of me has been dedicated to that.
Sure, you're getting high on life now. You're getting high on life through a passion and a newfound hobby that you can participate in and give yourself everything you need to live the life of gratitude and to live the best life Chris can live, also by helping others learn a little bit more about themselves as a non-addict, because living 18 years as an addict and then all of a sudden stopping and being 487 days in or whatever it may be, there's a lot of adjusting there, that needs to happen to live your new life, so
you won't believe that on day 3, I'm out of the hospital, I'm at home on day 3. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I want to eat. I didn't know. I never cared. It never mattered. And now on day 3, I'm realizing my life has substance. There's value.
Right.
I can enjoy things. I can be sad. I can be happy.
Right. You have.
It's amazing. This is the greatest gift I have ever given myself. This is the greatest thing that I've ever encountered.
Sure. And it's an absolute blessing. And it was sent by God to you that day when you were having perhaps the worst day of your life turned into one of the best days of your life through reinvention and, taking on this journey, which has not been easy. I can't imagine. But listen, I got to have you back on the program because there's so much more that we need to discuss. And, we're limited on time here. But again, Chris, I sincerely appreciate you coming on this program and being vulnerable and being real and being raw. It takes a special person to do that, to share their testimony. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you are helping literally thousands and millions of people out there. And with that, I am so appreciative for everything you do and continue to do for our great nation. your service, sacrifice, and dedication to our nation.